There is one sentence from Tuesday that every other headline is treating as background noise. A Pakistani senior official told Haaretz that the United States and Iran are getting close to finalizing an agreement to end the war. Getting close to finalizing, not getting close to talking, not getting close to agreeing on a framework, getting close to finalizing. These are different stages of a negotiation. Finalizing means the document is being reviewed, the specific terms are in view, and the primary remaining question is whether both sides can bridge the last gap. That is not where this negotiation has been for the past 66 days. It has been in stalemate, in proposal and counter-proposal, in blast or deal, in 14 points against 9 points. Finalizing is a different stage entirely, and this came from a Pakistani official, not from Washington, not from Tehran, from the mediator, the country that has been running the channel throughout this war. The country that has been in the room with both sets of proposals, the country whose officials have been the most reliably accurate source of where the negotiations actually stand, as opposed to where each side publicly claims they stand. Pakistan said getting close to finalizing. I want to spend today explaining what that actually means, what the remaining gaps are, what Pakistan's specific role has been, and why its officials are the most credible source on this question. What the convergence of deadlines, the war powers clock, Trump's China trip, the approaching Hajj season is doing to the timetable. Why Araghchi flying to Beijing on the same day is not just an Iran-China relationship story, but a specific piece of the deal's construction, and what a finalized deal would actually look like, based on what has been publicly disclosed about each side's positions, from the original US 9-point proposal to Iran's 14 points and the remaining gap between them. Let me start with Pakistan's role, because understanding why a Pakistani official's getting close carries more weight than any American or Iranian statement requires understanding what Pakistan has actually been doing. Pakistan's Army Chief General Syed Asim Munir has been the primary operational manager of the mediation channel. Araghchi met him in Islamabad twice. Pakistani officials delivered the US 15-point proposal to Iran on March 25th. Pakistani officials transmitted Iran's initial proposals back to Washington. When the formal Islamabad talks on April 11th failed to produce a breakthrough, Pakistan kept the informal channel running. The Pakistani Foreign Ministry processed each formal proposal submission, Iran's first Hormuz First framework, the revised 14-point plan on May 3rd, the US reply that Iran was reviewing on May 4th. Every document that has moved between Tehran and Washington in this war has passed through Pakistani hands. That means Pakistani officials know the exact wording of both sides' proposals. They know where Iran's 14 points intersect with the US 9 points. They know which of Iran's demands the US has indicated willingness to negotiate toward, and which it has categorically rejected. They know whether the gap on nuclear sequencing has narrowed and by how much. They know what the US reply to the 14 points actually said, which neither side has publicly disclosed. When a Pakistani senior official says getting close to finalizing, they are not summarizing media reports. They are describing the state of a document they have been handling directly. The House of Commons Library briefing from Tuesday, one of the most detailed independent analyses of the negotiations published, confirmed that Pakistan-mediated talks are focused on 4 issue clusters: Hormuz freedom of navigation, Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program, reconstruction and sanctions, and a long-term peace agreement. It confirmed that Iran has called for firm international guarantees against future aggression and has suggested that guarantees could include China, Pakistan, Turkey, and Russia as co-signatories. That co-signatory structure is why Araghchi is in Beijing on Tuesday. Not just to brief China on Iran's position, to recruit China as one of the guarantee powers for a deal whose durability requires more than American commitment. Now let me explain what the remaining gap actually is. Because getting close to finalizing does not mean the gap is closed. It means it is small enough that both sides can see its edges. The US position, as stated by Trump, Rubio, and Witkoff across multiple press statements, has been consistent on its core elements. First, Iran must commit to never having nuclear weapons. Trump has called this the, at this moment, non-negotiable. Second, Iran's highly enriched uranium, the 440 kilograms enriched to 60% purity, must be removed from Iran. This has been the single most intractable specific demand. 397 pounds of material that is a short technical step from weapons grade that has no civilian application that every nuclear weapons expert has identified as the operational core of a potential Iranian bomb. The US wants it out of Iran, sent to Russia, placed in IAEA custody, converted to fuel rods, whatever mechanism, but physically removed from Iranian control. Third, Iran must agree to verification mechanisms that prevent sprinting toward a nuclear weapon at any future point, in Rubio's exact words. These means IAEA inspections of all declared and suspected sites, centrifuge limitations, enrichment caps. Fourth, Hormuz must be open for free navigation without Iranian fees, tolls, or seizures. The U.S. 15-point proposal from March 25 also included limits on ballistic missiles and restrictions on Iranian support for armed groups, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi Shia militias. Iran's position, as stated in the 14-point proposal and in various Araghchi communications, has been nuclear can be discussed in Phase 3 after security guarantees in Phase 1 and Hormuz governance in Phase 2. The nuclear phase must begin from an acknowledgement of Iran's right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Not zero enrichment, not permanent suspension, but acknowledged civilian enrichment. Iran will not remove all enriched uranium from its territory. The 60% stockpile is, from Iran's perspective, a deterrent and a negotiating asset simultaneously. Removing it before a deal is finalized and before security guarantees are binding would leave Iran vulnerable to the same treatment it received in 2018 when America walked away from the JCPOA. It would have given up an asset in exchange for a commitment that proved non-durable. The gap between those two positions has been the entire war's diplomatic core. But Pakistani officials saying getting close to finalizing means something specific has moved. And based on all available public evidence about what the U.S. reply to the 14 points may have contained, 3 specific movements are the most likely candidates for what Pakistan is describing as finalization proximity. Based on the available evidence, 3 things have likely moved in ways that the public positions do not yet reflect. First, the nuclear sequencing. The U.S. originally said nuclear must be addressed first. Iran said Hormuz first. The 14-point proposal put nuclear in Phase 3. The U.S. reply to the 14 points, which Iran was reviewing on Monday, almost certainly contains a modified position on sequencing, not accepting nuclear in Phase 3, but possibly accepting a framework where Hormuz opens simultaneously with the beginning of nuclear talks, rather than requiring nuclear resolution before Hormuz opens. That would be a sequencing compromise that both sides can describe in their preferred terms. Trump. Nuclear talks begin immediately. Iran. Hormuz opens without nuclear surrender being precondition. Second, the enrichment question. The U.S. wants removal of enriched uranium and suspension of enrichment. Iran will not accept zero enrichment or full removal. The middle ground that has been discussed in multiple back-channel reports is a disposition arrangement for Iran's 60% uranium stockpile, either transfer to a third country like Russia or placement in IAEA custody within Iran, combined with an enrichment limit that allows civilian-level uranium production under enhanced inspection, but prohibits further enrichment to 60%. Japan enriches uranium. Germany participates in the Urenco Enrichment Consortium. Enrichment under constraint with no weapons program is a model that exists and that both sides could accept. Third, the guarantees structure. Iran's ambassador to China said international guarantees against future conflict could include China, Pakistan, Turkey, and Russia. This is the structure that Araghchi is in Beijing to build. If China formally co-signs the security guarantee that prevents future American military action against Iran, the deal becomes structurally more durable than any bilateral commitment. China's economic relationship with Iran creates a concrete enforcement mechanism. If America violates the guarantee, China has the tools to respond economically in ways that affect America's most important trading relationship. That is a real deterrent that paper guarantees from small states cannot provide. These 3 movements, sequencing compromise, enrichment disposition, guarantee structure, are the architecture of getting close to finalizing. Not one document signed, but three parallel tracks converging toward a point where a single document can be assembled from them. Now, let me explain the convergence of deadlines, because Pakistan's getting close is happening against a calendar that is compressing the decision space on multiple fronts simultaneously. The first deadline is Trump's China trip. Trump is heading to Beijing next week. CNN described it as the most consequential trip of his second term. If a deal on Iran is to be announced with Chinese endorsement, which is what the guarantee structure requires, it needs to be assembled before or during that visit. Araghchi in Beijing Tuesday means the Iranian position is being presented to China before Trump arrives. China then has 3 or 4 days to formulate its own response before Trump lands. The Beijing visit is both a deadline and an opportunity for the deal's final assembly. The second deadline is the Hajj season. Al Jazeera's analysis noted that millions of pilgrims will be in Saudi Arabia in late May. Riyadh's diplomatic and logistical bandwidth will be severely constrained during Hajj. Saudi Arabia is a key interlocutor in any Gulf-wide post-war security arrangement. If the deal requires Saudi endorsement, and a Hormuz governance framework that the UAE and Saudi Arabia can accept is necessary for the deal's regional legitimacy, that endorsement needs to be secured before Hajj. The window is approximately 3 weeks. The third deadline is the renewed war powers clock. Monday's combat in the Strait, U.S. attack helicopters sinking 6 Iranian boats, restarted the 60-day countdown that the White House tried to argue had paused or terminated. Collins, Murkowski, and Curtis return from congressional recess next week. The constitutional confrontation that the Senate deferred 3 weeks ago is about to resume, with Monday's combat as the new evidence that hostilities are ongoing. If Trump wants to avoid a war powers battle in his own party, he needs a deal framework he can point to before those Republicans return and demand authorization. These 3 deadlines, China trip, Hajj, war powers, are all converging in the same 2-week window. Pakistan's senior officials saying getting close to finalizing in this specific week, in this specific convergence, is the most precise statement of diplomatic timing that has been made in this war. Let me steelman the argument that getting close to finalizing is premature, because Pakistani optimism has been expressed before in this conflict and has not always reflected the final outcome. Pakistan's officials said Islamabad was ready to host formal talks multiple times before the April 11th meeting that failed to produce a breakthrough. They facilitated the April 25-27 tour that produced optimistic statements from Araghchi, but no agreement. They transmitted the 14-point proposal that Trump called "can't imagine it would be acceptable" before reading the exact wording. Pakistani officials have a consistent incentive to be optimistic about their mediation. Their regional standing and relationship with both sides depends on being seen as effective intermediaries. Optimistic statements from Pakistan have not always presaged actual finalization. The specific issue that has resisted resolution throughout is the enriched uranium disposition. Iran has 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. The U.S. wants it out of Iran. Iran says it will not surrender an asset it considers a sovereign deterrent. That is not a sequencing question or a verification question. It is a question of physical control of a material that is 92% of the way to weapons-grade enrichment. Neither side has publicly moved from its position on this, and here is where the steelman collapses. Getting close to finalizing, said by the mediator who has handled every document in this negotiation, carries a different epistemic weight than getting close, said by either party's public spokesperson. Pakistan's officials are not optimistic for its own sake. They are managing a mediation that their country's regional standing and economic relationship with both parties depends on. When they say finalizing rather than productive talks, they are making a specific claim about the state of a document they are holding. The enriched uranium question has either been addressed in the U.S. reply to the 14 points, and Pakistan has seen that reply, or it has not. If Pakistan says getting close, the uranium question has either been resolved or bracketed in a way that allows finalization to proceed without it. Watch Araghchi's statement after the Wang Yi meeting Wednesday morning. If China and Iran announce any joint framework element, even a general statement about Hormuz governance or security guarantees, the deal's international scaffolding will be publicly visible before Trump lands in Beijing. Watch whether Trump's short-period pause on Project Freedom is measured in days or weeks. If no resumption is announced by Friday, the pause is structurally becoming a permanent posture change. And watch whether the White House sends Congress any updated communication on the war powers question, which would signal that the administration believes it needs to legally reposition before the deal is announced. Pakistan said getting close to finalizing. Trump paused Project Freedom. Araghchi is in Beijing. All three of those things are true. Together, they describe not just a war that is looking for its ending, but a war that may have found it and is now assembling the pieces in the right order so that both sides can say they won when it is announced. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one. 3 convergence deadlines, China trip, Hajj, war powers, all arriving in the same 2-week window. Pakistan saying getting close to finalizing is not just a diplomatic assessment, it is a time-sensitive claim. The deadlines create the pressure that converts getting close into finalizing. Without the China trip next week, without Hajj in late May, without Congressional Republicans returning with war powers demands, the negotiation could continue in its proposal and counter-proposal rhythm for another month. With all 3 deadlines converging simultaneously, the window for finalization is narrow and both sides know it. Pakistan's Islamabad is not just the mediation venue, it is the channel's headquarters. Al Jazeera's analysis confirmed that Pakistani officials said substantive negotiations were likely to continue out of public view, with visible engagement reserved for when a deal is within reach. Getting close to finalizing is Pakistan signaling that visible engagement should begin, that the deal is within reach. Now let me also explain what China's role in guarantees actually means in practice. Because the House of Commons library briefing confirmed that Iran's ambassador to China suggested international guarantees against future conflict could include China, Pakistan, Turkey, and Russia as co-signatories. Iran has previously said it will not accept temporary ceasefires. It wants a permanent solution with firm guarantees. A guarantee co-signed by China is different from an American promise in a specific structural way. China's economic relationship with Iran, the crude purchases, the yuan infrastructure, the trade relationship, creates a concrete cost for violation. If America violates the guarantee and attacks Iran again, China's response does not have to be military. It can be economic, restricting American access to Chinese markets, reducing dollar holdings, expanding yuan-based trade systems. These tools are available to China and are not available to Pakistan or Turkey or Russia in the same magnitude. China's co-signature on an Iran guarantee is backed by real leverage in a way that purely diplomatic guarantees are not. Iran knows this. Araghchi in Beijing is securing this specific instrument. And Trump going to China next week with the Iran deal in progress rather than in stalemate serves Trump's China visit agenda too. A Trump-Xi summit that produces a joint framework on Iran resolution. Trump gets diplomatic credit for resolving the war through China's involvement. Xi gets credit for being the responsible global power that helped end a conflict. Serves both leaders' domestic and international narratives simultaneously. That alignment of interests between Trump's China trip and the Iran deal's finalization timeline is not coincidental. It is the reason Pakistan's getting close is being said now and not 2 weeks from now. Pakistan said getting close to finalizing. Trump paused Project Freedom. Araghchi is in Beijing. 3 convergent deadlines, 1 2-week window. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one. Let me also add the domestic American signal that is running alongside everything else. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat in a deeply red state, declared a state of emergency over gas prices on Tuesday. He signed an emergency regulation to freeze the gas tax and an executive order reducing it by 10 cents per gallon for regular and diesel, specifically attributing the need to the Iran war's effect on fuel costs. He urged the state's Republican Attorney General to sign the order. A state government declaring a formal gas tax emergency specifically because of the Iran war is the domestic political signal that every member of Congress returning from recess next week will be receiving from their own states, Kentucky today, other states likely in the coming days. Congressional Republicans who survived difficult town halls during recess with constituents who remember gas at $2.98 and are now paying $4.45 are returning to Washington with a specific mandate that no amount of the blockade is highly effective. Press statements can neutralize. A deal that brings gas back toward $3.50 is worth more politically than any number of ships that CENTCOM can claim were redirected. Pakistan knows this. Araghchi knows this. Wang Yi knows this. Trump knows this. The domestic American economic pressure is the clock that nobody publishes, but everybody reads. And that clock is now producing state-level emergencies in addition to national polls, showing 61% saying the war was a mistake. Getting close to finalizing in this context is not just a diplomat's optimistic framing. It is a precise reading of multiple converging pressures: the Chinese trip, the Hajj season, the war powers clock, the gas tax emergencies, the Congressional Republicans returning, all pointing toward the same narrow window where finalization is achievable in a way it was not achievable last week or the week before. Watch the next 72 hours. Araghchi meets Wang Yi Wednesday morning. Trump is due to communicate with his diplomatic team about the China trip preparations. Congressional Republicans begin returning to Washington Thursday and Friday. If any joint China-Iran statement emerges from the Beijing meeting, the framework's international architecture is publicly visible. If Trump says anything about great progress updated with specifics rather than just the general formulation, the deal may be closer to announcement than any public source has yet indicated. Pakistan said, getting close to finalizing. That sentence, said by the mediator who has held every document in this negotiation, is the most important thing said on Tuesday. Watch. If you found this useful, push back on it in the comments. I will see you in the next one.